these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. So this week, the ATF submitted a ban on pistol braces to the Federal Register, effectively turning countless guns into short-barreled rifles and countless gun owners into felons. How did this happen? Well, it wasn't a new law. It was unelected bureaucrats changing definitions and reinterpreting something they'd already interpreted. No legislative process, no procedure for the public to take part in, and no recourse for those who make and use the braces. This isn't an isolated incident. The ATF has used its power on its own and at the direction of leftist administrations to go after lawful gun owners. This causes mass confusion. It also makes it harder for the gun industry to function as they try to interpret new laws and rules and predict what rules are going to come down in the future. Joining me today to talk about the ATF and what's it like dealing with them is the founder and co-owner of San Antonio, Texas-based Sons of Liberty Gun Works, Mike Mihalski. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've known you for a while, and I know we talked about doing this podcast like a long time ago when the ATF was up to, or the banks were trying to code gun shops a little differently, and maybe we'll get into that too on how that's affected you or if it has affected you. But we'll just talk about guns. We'll have some fun here. We'll talk about the ATF, which isn't much fun, but it's a lot of gun owners are certainly interested in it. I'll say real quick, again, founder of Sons of Liberty Gun Works in San Antonio, Texas. Wanted to have on you because you're a local guy, small business owner, very familiar with this. In 2014, which is one workbench in the basement of a lumber yard, he founded Sons of Liberty Gun Works alongside current co-owner Kyle Groths. Under Mihalski's leadership, the company is considered the fastest growing rifle manufacturer in the United States. Takes pride in supplying countless government entities and civilians with high quality rifles. I've also committed to education and fact-based advocacy for the Second Amendment, travel the country training armorers and fervent firearms enthusiasts on rifle construction, and provide counsel to federal, state, and local officials on firearm policies, which is what you're doing right now. So appreciate that. Thank you for serving your country, sir. Let's just get into this. Can you describe a pistol brace? Because maybe people don't even know what a pistol brace is. I don't have one. Can you describe what it is to people? And then also why it's important to some folks to have?
So the pistol brace is a benign piece of plastic. It's an unserialized, unregulated part. It goes on the back of a gun. I want people to understand this doesn't apply just to AR-15s or to semi-automatic rifles. I mean, every major manufacturer in the country was making some form of a pistol braced gun, bolt action rifles, single shot rifles. I mean, it was a way to have it was originally defined as a way for people with either some kind of disability or limited strength to fire a heavy pistol. And it let us use, a shorter barrel. It's a piece of plastic meant to allow somebody to fire a heavier pistol.
Basically allows you to put your arm through like a brace in the buttstock where the buttstock is, and you put your arm in there. And it allows for that extra stability. That's all it is.
And the distinction here, the reason why it's important is because the ATF originally ruled, in their opinion, their position was, in 2014, 2015, when this thing became popular, was that pistol brace does not in and of itself make a pistol a rifle. Regardless if somebody shouldered it or not, that doesn't define nomenclature. If I were to put a revolver against my shoulder and fire it, the revolver does not become classified as a rifle at that point, simply because I used it in a way that was unintended. So the brace itself was never part of the nomenclature of the overall gun or part of its classification, and that was their position, and that seemed pretty reasonable.
So you asked me before we started recording, are you guys even thinking about this up in Congress, up in Washington? And I had to tell you, well, not really. I mean, I am. We're doing this podcast. I've introduced legislation. It's actually bipartisan. My legislation simply gives gun owners and the gun community a way to appeal the rulemaking process at the ATF, much like most government agencies have to allow. They are unique in that they don't allow it. And that would allow the Second Amendment community to fight back against this unjust rulemaking without costly litigation. So that's what my bill does. I think it's a clever way, frankly, to deal with this issue, because we're making it about really putting the ATF on the same level playing field as every other government agency. You got to do things the way everyone else does it. And why that's controversial, I don't know. And so we don't necessarily make it about pistol braces in particular, even though it would help, obviously, with this fight. I always try to do, it'd be easy to like the red meat conversation is just abolish the ATF. Well, okay. I mean, it's sure. I mean, I know I can rile up people and get that going, but I like to try and do things that have even the slightest chance of getting through. I mean, what's the ATF's deal with pistol braces in general, though? Like, why are they controversial? Why are they always targeting this? Because it's not the first time.
No, and that's just it. I mean, there's been no recent data to suggest that these guns are inherently more dangerous than, say, a gun without a pistol brace. There's been no high-profile crimes involving one. It's like they found a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, and like everything the left does. When it comes to like just abandoning pragmatism, their solution is always the one that most negatively affects the most people. It's the one that has the most radical changes to things. So we're looking at this, and they're trying to define the pistol brace as basically a loophole around short barrel rifles.
Right.
And so I don't know if the ATF is even aware. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. According to their estimate, there's 3 million in circulation. That's according to the ATF's estimate. Now, if you look at the companies that produced pistol braces, they have no duty to report the number of pistol braces they produce because they're unserialized, unregulated. We put the number closer to 40 million. It's definitely somewhere between 20 to 40 million.
Wow.
So that's a lot of people to turn into felons overnight for having done nothing. As a matter of fact, the way that you become a felon in this situation is to do absolutely nothing. Right?
Yeah.
You have a legally owned pistol brace gun. If you were to put it in your gun safe today and never touch it again, you would wake up in 120 days a felon.
Yeah. And I think that's, well, it's absurd. And there's no further talk by the ATF or this government of how would they enforce such a law. I mean, what are you going to do? Like you said, these aren't serialized. You can't track it. It's just what if they catch. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right. There's no way to. I don't see how they're going to reasonably enforce it on some wide scale. Now, do I think that there'll be selective enforcement?
Yeah.
Probably so. And the people that are doing their best to comply with this, if they were to go through the necessary steps to register this, if that registration is denied for any reason, any reason at all, even in the attempt to comply with it, you're basically admitting guilt to possessing a prohibited firearm. And so unlike most of the process, whenever you file a Form 1 with the intention to construct something in the future, at this point, you're filing a Form 1 to continue to possess something you already have. And I would imagine there's going to be some unintended consequences like everything, they propose,
Yeah, and certainly no consequences for people's safety. And that's what frustrates me. And that's always my debate with the left is I understand this thing makes you scared. I understand that you think in this case, at least, the pistol brace is used as a loophole to get to have a shorter barrel on that gun. And let's do some education here. Some state, depending on what state you're in, your rifle the barrel has to be over a certain length. I'm not even sure what it is in Texas.
It's 16 inch. I mean, that's a national thing, right? So that's a federally regulated thing. A 16-inch barrel is the minimum. And this goes back to I don't know how many people even know how SBRs ended up on the registry or how they became an NFA item. But it was during Prohibition, right? It was during the 1934 National Firearms Act. The original target of the act was handguns.
Yeah.
And so they included short barrel rifles and short barreled shotguns on that to preemptively close the loophole, right? Well, the pistol restriction got struck down, but the preemptive
by the Supreme Court
closing,
recently, yeah.
Well, I'm saying, but even in 1934, though, their original goal was to restrict pistol ownership. That got struck down in 1934, but the short barrel rifle and shotgun stayed. And that was never their intention. Their intention was pistol restriction. But it's just kind of funny that
it's just, okay. I didn't know all that history. That's interesting.
And these were, I was going to say, they weren't common guns in the 30s. And what's funny is how they got on the registry to begin with was you had the government creates prohibition, which leads to a rise in armed criminal activity.
Right.
And then to solve that problem, they create these laws. Prohibition goes away, but we're still left with the, NFA laws, which is, it's kind of funny how we got here in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's not really a great argument for it. Any argument for it. There's nothing more lethal about a rifle with a shorter barrel than a 16-inch barrel. If anything, if the purpose of a gun is, say, self-defense in your home, and if I have an intruder in the home, I'm probably going to pick up my rifle before I'll pick up my pistol. It's just more accurate. My wife would certainly be more comfortable with a rifle than a pistol. She's going to be more accurate with it. It has 3 points of contact and higher magazine capacity. She has a better chance against an invader than she does with a pistol, which she's not very good at shooting at. In fact, most people are not good at shooting their pistol. I know there's a lot of people like to take cool pictures with their guns, probably not that good at it in a serious situation, especially not a pistol. It's hard. And a rifle gives you an advantage inside your own home, and a short barrel rifle is a much better thing to have in those close kind of quarters as well. So there's very good reason to allow that, just from a basic self-defense perspective. And it's like many of these laws, it's kind of scary looking. I think they would say like gang members could hide it better. Well, I mean,
that was the original argument in the 30s.
That was the original argument. Yeah.
I guess it's kind of funny how arbitrary the barrel length is. I mean, a 15.9-inch barrel will land you in prison for 10 years. A 16-inch barrel, totally cool. But you made a great point, earlier about what is it accomplishing? I would imagine that if somebody has the propensity to go commit armed violence, they're not going to be on their computer filing registration with the government. Like the only people that this impacts are people that have some interest in abiding by a law or following a law. The people that you might want to restrict, they're not they're not registering their legally owned pistols.
Right. Well, so I want to get from your perspective, just as a gun store owner, somebody who manufactures these things. What kind of processes do you have to deal with on a daily basis? What kind of regulations do you have to deal with? What does it take to open up a shop like yours and deal with the ATF? Just in general, what's your experience?
Well, you voluntarily enter into an agreement with the government in order to have an FFL, in order to manufacture guns, that you abide by, federal law. The frustrating stuff that we see is if you were to ask 10 different ATF compliance officers the same question, you could get 10 different answers. A lot of it is ambiguous. And no matter how hard you try to comply with that, it's virtually impossible to like get through an audit per se without some type of infraction. Usually it's something very minor, the wrong date format, or perhaps the way you were instructed to log something in and out of a bound book changes, and it's kind of subjective. None of those answers you get from the compliance officer will be a defense to prosecution or a defense to revocation, right? So I mean, you can't say, well, my compliance officer told me to do that. No, they'll point to something in some other interpretation. It's pretty difficult. As far as the regulation side to this, again, rules are constantly changing, interpretations are constantly changing, and the ATF has become pretty hostile towards the industry they're supposed to regulate, which I don't ever think was the intention, right? We're not talking about the willfully arming cartels or willfully arming terrorists. That you're seeing punitive action for administrative errors that are not nefarious, and it's becoming harder and harder to appeal that. Matter of fact, there's some proposed legislation right now. I don't think it's been I don't think they've actually put it into process, but to take away the word willful from the
Yeah,
from the
I've heard
process.
that.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
You know,
So now you're just
imagine
liable for what somebody does. I mean, how, from your perspective, I mean, well, are you guys able to suss that out, in your sales? I mean, one problem we do have is people straw man buyers buy it and they sell it to somebody else, and they traffic it south of our border, whatever the case may be. If you listen to Democrats, that's a huge problem. It just happens all the time, and gun dealers just don't care. Is that an accurate assessment?
No, I mean, not only are we compelled by federal law to thwart that, we're also compelled by our own conscience. If a 80-year-old woman came into my store with a briefcase full of cash and wanted to buy 50 AR-15s, I would find that to be a little suspicious. And so again, we do our part. We do every single thing that we're federally expected to do, and through our own compelled by our own conscience, we try to not contribute to the problem.
Right. And you can kind of tell, I think you can generally kind of tell who's potentially nefarious and who isn't. And I thought of drafting a bill that would require the ATF, like 90% of the ATF's resources, to be dedicated to simply preventing guns from going south of our border. That would seem like a good use of this law enforcement agency, as opposed to what it's doing now, just spending all this time really just felonizing law-abiding Americans. I don't know if felonizing is a word, but it could be. And I just made it one.
No, and you're not talking about some minor, like a fine or a penalty or some citation. You're talking, in this case, for the pistol braces, you're talking about 10 years in prison, $250,000 fine. And there's no victim in this crime.
Yeah.
There's not a victim. If you, like I said, if you took your legally owned pistol braced gun, stuck it in the safe, and never touched it again, you would wake up looking at those kinds of penalties. That's a pretty.
So what's your advice to? So then, what is your legal advice, if you have any, for people with pistol braces right now? Like, what will make that contraption not land them in jail? Should just in case? Like, I mean, who knows? Maybe the police are in their house for whatever other reason. And they don't want that added to their sentence. Do they need to take the gun apart? What do they do?
Yeah, so I mean, you have the options presented are you can take the pistol brace off and then destroy the pistol brace to avoid constructive intent. You can surrender the weapon. You could destroy the weapon, or you could register the weapon through the NFA. And those are your options. The problem is, I mean, even from aside from the felonious aspect of it, you've devalued the asset, right? I mean, it's very, very difficult to sell NFA items. We're not talking about like collector machine guns that are valuable due to their scarcity. You're talking about things that are the opposite of scarce, but you've devalued it. You can't even go pawn it. If you wanted to extract some value from it. I mean,
can you expand on that? Registering it, what would that entail? What would that mean?
So when you register something through the, and this is at the crux of it. This is the issue, is that this is a backdoor registration. Considering how many are out there, this is a backdoor de facto way to get a lot of guns on a registry. And what this means is that your serial number, the configuration of the gun, the responsible people for that gun are all in a database that is monitored and regulated by the ATF. So right now, all of these guns currently are not on, or the majority of them are not on any type of registry, unless there's a state registry, right? But there's no federal registry for Title I guns. After this, there will be a registry for, these guns. And you're talking about adding millions of them, and that's really.
But if I had a short barreled pistol brace right now, like, would I be able to register it, or I mean, is there a risk that they're going to say, you know what, you just got to turn it in? I mean, is that the risk that people face? And even
there's been
last
year we saw mass denials for Form 1 suppressors. They changed their interpretation of what they meant by a part, or by how to construct it, and you saw mass denials. The difference is that, again, if somebody historically, traditionally, if you were denied the ability to go and construct something in the future, you're not on the wrong side of the law at that point. Right now, you're asking for permission to keep what you already have. And by submitting this application, you are, in sense, like, you're proving and admitting that you're in possession of this gun. If they deny you, however erroneous it may be, I'd imagine that you very well could expect a knock out of the door, and that's
Right.
not a paranoia. You very well could expect a knock at the door because you have told them, I'm in possession of this thing. You tried to comply, you tried to register it, and there's no guarantee that they're going to accept your application or approve it.
Yeah. So, so that's an important thing to note, just as we try to figure out how to deal with this. So that's the pistol braces. I think we've kind of beat that dead horse. I just ask you generally, because you're constantly in the Second Amendment debate. Do you have any good examples or experiences of persuading someone who's really pro gun control to see it your way? What are the arguments that you think people will listen to who disagree with us on the right to bear arms and the right to own them and operate them? What are some arguments you think are effective?
In the last couple of years, the demographic of what you would imagine a gun owner is completely different. That whatever caricature somebody might imagine a gun owner is, Cletus out in the woods or something, that's forever
a guy with a beard and deer heads behind him.
yeah, right, exactly. So interestingly enough, that I show up to the town hall meetings. I'm on the debate stages. I'm talking to the other side all the time. I'm constantly engaging, right? Once COVID kicked off and people were legitimately concerned about reduced police response and stuff, you started noticing the gun rush kickoff. Then the people that I was debating with, and I'm on stage and in the town halls debating against, I was the only gun guy they knew. And so I would get the phone call like, hey, I think I need to buy a gun, from people that have been not only anti-gun, but so anti-gun that they're willing to be activist about it, right? Well, once the conversation stopped being ideological and it became a real thing, you might actually need a gun. They came and wanted to buy guns from me. And I was happy to sell it to them because, number one, the Second Amendment applies to everybody, even people I politically disagree with. And it seemed to make them less enthusiastic about opposing us. And nobody once asked me for the gun that held the least amount of bullets. Once the conversation stopped being ideological and started being, I don't want to be the only person on my block without one.
Yeah.
And the fastest growing demographic of gun owners has been historically people that have been opposed to it. So I would encourage people to engage. I don't know if in the last 2 years, I've also seen that facts and data and those things aren't quite as compelling as you would think they are. And it's not just about guns. This is about so many different aspects of whether it's medicine or climate or energy or whatever, people get so entrenched in their camps that it's hard talking to each other. But
yeah. But what you're telling me too is personal safety. It would be the simple way of saying that. It's the argument is about personal safety, and they still may go buy a gun. Like I think it's funny you mentioned that they never want the gun with the least amount of bullets. They're like, well, I only need a 5-round magazine because that's what I believe in. It's like not for you. You don't, and you'd be very wise not to want a 5-round magazine. That will be very unhelpful when you run out. And but you're not very trained, not well trained on quick reloads.
The most compelling, argument that I've seen to bring people into the gun community, or I shouldn't say the gun community, but bring people into gun ownership, simply has been the condition of the country over the last 2 years. You have reduced proactive policing, you have bail reform, you have social unrest. Those things have compelled more people into gun ownership than any argument I could ever possibly make.
Right. And because they know deep down too, that them owning the gun, just like I know that my small little armory is not contributing to gun violence. I know that, and so one of the things I hated the most was in one of these kind of gun debates get all hot, and they receive a lot of attention when you see people posting videos of them destroying their ARs. It's like, that was so stupid. That AR wasn't going to kill anyone. unless it was like done rightfully, I mean, because you seem like a normal person that's not going to go kill a bunch of people.
Yeah,
And,
I've asked this question on debate panels, and if I were to hand you a gun right now, am I in any more danger than before? And the answer is no, unless you're the type of person with the propensity to commit armed violence, and that's the crux,
Yeah, and the other frustrating thing about the general political debate is all the attention goes on these we're calling them mass shootings, but I prefer a little bit more of an accurate description. I would call them, I'll call them a few things, but they're these like dramatic theatrical crimes committed by an insane person. That's different than just a mass shooting by a gang member, or a kind of a revenge killing, something like that. These are nearly impossible to predict, and they're almost all copycat crimes. They're like a sociological contagion that has happened since the Columbine shootings. And that can't, these and it seems like they're all the time because they make a lot of news, but just by statistically they are very rare and therefore extremely hard to deal with and predict. But the gun debate always centers around that, and then we had some recently in California. They kind of got out of the news pretty quick because it just didn't really fit the narrative, and none of the left's solutions, so-called solutions or common sense gun laws would have affected that situation at all. Because the truth is, like, it's living in a free society is living in a free society, and crazy people can do crazy things. If it wasn't a gun, it could be a truck that they just bowled through that party, and it's devastating and it's awful to watch. But the solutions offered simply are not solutions, and it's hard to get people who are emotional to see it that way.
Yeah, so we had a threat at my kid's school. There was somebody that had made a credible threat of violence. So whenever you talk to other parents who historically are anti-gun, whenever you're dealing with a problem that's right in front of you and you might have to deal with it tomorrow, nobody suggested gun control. Nobody suggested we pass some kind of bill. No, every parent was, let's beef up security at the school until this thing sorts itself out, or until they get to the bottom of it. So whenever you force somebody to face an issue in the immediate, and you take away the ideological side of it, and you look at the practical side of things, the solutions they get a lot more pragmatic. Like, enhancing school security is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like the constitutionally most sound way to go about it, as opposed to depriving millions of people of their constitutional right to own a gun. You would think that hardening targets. Yeah. I wish every solution started out with that type of thing, right? I mean, I know there are some people on the the pro restriction side or the anti-gun side. I wish they knew that, like, I love my kids just as much as they do, that we have the same concerns and same fears as parents. Our solutions are just a little bit different. And I wish the conversation would start at, well, we have a rule book for this. It's the Constitution. What is the most constitutionally sound way to go about addressing it? So unfortunately, the conversation has become so polarized.
In the school, it's pretty hard to get into your average corporate office building. It's pretty hard. You got to go to a front desk. They got to know who you are. They give you like a little temporary badge. You go through some like a kind of an, I don't know, a little gate thing, and then you get into an elevator. It's generally pretty difficult, and it's difficult to get into some schools. So some schools do take this seriously. Single points of entry, multiple phases, I think, for that security. No outsiders can just come in. It's not like it's never been done before. And then some schools aren't, and then sometimes just mistakes are made. And the Uvalde issue is just a really tragic example of that, on multiple levels, both the response to it, plus the fact that, this guy got in just with a door ajar. But then we have to take a step back and think about how that's actually prevented.
Well, I mean, allowing teachers who volunteer to be armed is not the craziest thing in the world. I mean, first of all, as far as hardening targets, I mean, try getting an AR-15 onto an airplane. That's pretty difficult. You know, and then if you look at how many pilots have opted to carry a gun in a cockpit, since 9/11, people would be surprised how many guns are in the sky at any given time. I think
Really plus those undercover agents too. I mean, yeah,
right. So normally, with the exception of situations like Uvalde, which is a horrible thing, normally some type of mass killing like that stops the second gun shows up on the scene. The moment there's any armed opposition, that shooter usually eats the gun, which is fine by me, or throws their hands up, or if nothing else, focuses their attention on the opposition, right? In every situation you hear with a mass shooting, there's usually at least one person who heroically throws their body at the shooter or uses their body to hold a door closed. If they have the guts to do that, I bet you they would have had the guts to return fire. And you look at how many situations are stopped by concealed carry. I mean, the fact that that's not, people aren't even willing to have that conversation about what voluntary carrying would look like. I mean, that just tells you that their problem is ideological. It's not practical.
Yeah, they don't like them. All right, let's lighten it up a little bit in the last few minutes. Let's get some recommendations for maybe somebody's listening and they're finally convinced that they should be gun owners. What's the first gun that you would recommend? If the obviously it depends on the purpose. So let's say their purpose is simple home defense. What's your recommendation?
I think the AR-15 is the most effective defensive tool a civilian can own. Yeah, it is. For the reasons we talked about, it really is. That's why I don't apologize. Like my company, I don't build modern sporting rifles. We build defensive tools. And I say that unapologetically because it is the best defensive tool a civilian can own. So that would be, it sounds counterintuitive for that to be your entry level weapon, but an AR-15 makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I went over the reasons earlier, right? I mean, I give an inexperienced shooter a pistol and an AR. They're going to be on target and safer with an AR much faster than they are with a pistol. A pistol just takes time. It's going to take time for you to get used to that. Again, there's 2 points of contact instead of 3. It's a shorter barrel. There's pretty obvious mechanical reasons why it's easier or harder.
Ammunition capacity, recoil. I mean, there's just a lot of good reasons. And if you look at, even just drywall, things like that. I mean, people think that rifles have some kind of, magical, properties of penetration and stuff, but you realize that it's, if you look at the actual testing of that, it's a little bit unfounded,
What are you saying exactly on the
I'm saying people that suggest shotguns for home defense with like buckshot or slugs, or even heavier pistol caliber ammo in terms of like it penetrating drywall or over penetration. You see that 5.56 actually makes a lot of sense in a home defense scenario.
What does it do? I actually don't even. I'm under the impression that if I shot 5.56 through my drywalls, it would definitely go through. If it hit a stud, probably not so much. But what is the basic?
Not in a more not in some dramatically more than say a slug or buckshot or 9mm, and then
it all about operates the same. Yeah,
right. I mean, I'm just saying it's people use the other thing too. If you go to a lot of gun shops across the country and you ask somebody behind the counter what they would suggest for home defense, till this day you have a lot of people that will tell you a shotgun with birdshot.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I mean it does not have the same lethality or the adequate lethality that you would want to, end a fight.
Yeah, it's definitely better than nothing, but it wouldn't necessarily be my first choice either, because especially birdshot. I can get shot with birdshot. I mean, basically when I was blown up, it's kind of like I was shot with like 16 rounds of birdshot. That's sort of what it was like to get blown up by an IED. That's what I looked like for sure. The point is you can power through that. If somebody's really crazy and want, and you got, depending on what kind of shotgun we're talking about. I mean, some shotguns are just amazing, obviously, and would make great home defense weapons. Not saying otherwise, but a lot of your kind of typical shotguns don't have that much round capacity. It's not sure I'd recommend it either. I think we agree on that. All right, what about concealed carry? What's your favorite concealed carry?
I carry a Glock 19. I think it's a good simple pistol. I think the guys at Glock have figured out how to make a good, reliable weapon. It's not overly complicated, and it's just a Glock 19. It's a good size. It's big enough to control, small enough to conceal.
Yeah,
it's makes sense.
It's pretty big. It's pretty big for a conceal. Like, where do you conceal it?
Inside the waistband, or now with Texas's laws as far as not having to conceal. Not that I don't open carry personally. That's not what I would do. But if you carry it strong side with like you're in a jacket or something, it's
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you got something over it. I like the SIG 365. It's tiny.
That's a good pistol.
Glock 19, but I tell people too, like, honestly, pick something you're good at shooting. That would be, because I'm not great at shooting every kind of pistol. There's just a different feel to all of them, and whatever you're good at, you should probably buy. Because
I'm a bit institutionalized. Yeah, I've been carrying a Glock for so long that I have some nice staccato pistols, and I have nice pistol. I just I'm more comfortable with the Glock, probably because I've been carrying one for so long.
Yeah, that makes sense. What if people are looking for upgrades to their, I don't know, say their AR-15, like what should they be looking at? Let's say they've got a pretty slick gun. I mean, what's the first thing they need to be looking at? Is it a different bolt assembly? Is it a trigger? Is it optics? What do you usually recommend if they're on a budget?
Well, a sling, a light, and an optic. A sling.
Yeah.
If you're building if you're outfitting a defensive AR-15, a sling, a light, and an optic. That's probably where I would start. Now, when you get into different bolts and buffers and the mechanical side of things, I mean, I just want people to be able to articulate why they're making some type of mechanical change to the gun. There's a lot of stuff out there that's new for the sake of being new. That's marketing gimmicks that doesn't actually mechanically enhance the rifle. So before you start making changes to stuff, at least be able to articulate why you're doing it, what benefit you're trying to get from it, right? But as far as
That's good advice.
A sling, a light, optic is pretty good way to start.
Pretty standard. All right, that was some good advice, and I got a meeting on oversight. We got to prep for. Mike, thanks for doing this. Thanks for kind of illuminating a lot about the gun industry, what you guys deal with, and the truth about pistol braces, what it's doing to law-abiding Americans, and obviously some good advice on gun ownership, man. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for having me, dude.
All right.